What if I told you that one of Canada's most respected CEOs once went to bed hungry in a freezing apartment where the windows rattled every time the winter wind touched them? What if I told you that the man who now overlooks the Toronto skyline from his glass office once stared at that same skyline from a bus stop, wondering if he would ever escape poverty? This is not a fantasy. This is the story of a boy who had nothing but belief. He was 8 years old, living in a small apartment in a forgotten neighborhood where snow piled up against cracked windows and the heater barely worked. His mother worked double shifts. His father was gone. Bills were stacked on the kitchen table like silent threats. But in that cold room, wrapped in a thin blanket, the boy made a silent promise to himself. One day, I will change this. He did not know how. He did not know when. But he knew why. And sometimes, when you know why, that is enough to survive another night. But surviving is not the same as winning. And what happened next would test that promise in ways he could never imagine. School was not an escape. It was another battlefield. His shoes were worn. His lunchbox was empty more days than full. Other kids talked about vacations to Banff and hockey tournaments in Vancouver. He stayed quiet. Poverty has a way of teaching silence, but silence can also build observation. While others talked, he watched. He studied how confident students spoke. He noticed how teachers respected discipline. He realized something powerful: the world responds differently to those who prepare. So he began waking up early. Before the sun rose over icy streets, before buses filled with noise, he sat at the small kitchen table doing homework under a flickering light. No one told him to do this. No motivational speaker visited his school. It was just him and a decision. Every morning he asked himself one question: will I stay here forever? And every morning his answer was no. But belief without action is just imagination, and soon he would learn that action demands sacrifice. By the time he turned 16, reality became heavier. His mother's health began to decline. Medical bills replaced old utility bills. The apartment felt smaller. The pressure felt larger. Many teenagers in his neighborhood chose shortcuts: quick money, easy distractions, fast reputations. For a moment he was tempted. When your stomach is empty and your family is struggling, wrong choices look reasonable. But he remembered that promise made at 8 years old. He started working part-time after school, cleaning offices in downtown Toronto. Every evening, while executives in tailored suits left their offices, he quietly emptied trash bins and wiped glass tables. One night he paused and looked around the boardroom. Leather chairs, city lights outside, confidence in the air. He whispered to himself, "One day I will sit here." It sounded impossible. It sounded foolish, but he kept whispering it anyway, because sometimes you must speak your future before you see it. Still, dreaming inside someone else's office is easy. Building your own is something else entirely. Graduation came without celebration. There was no money for a party, no luxury gifts, just a handshake from his mother and tears in her eyes. University acceptance arrived weeks later, but so did the tuition cost. The number looked impossible. For a few days, fear won. Maybe this was as far as he could go. Maybe dreams have limits when your bank account does. But then something shifted. He applied for scholarships. He worked extra shifts. He took student loans. He studied financial aid systems like they were exams themselves. It wasn't pride that pushed him forward. It was responsibility. He refused to let his mother's sacrifices be wasted. When he finally stepped onto campus, he did not feel lucky. He felt hungry. Hungry for knowledge, hungry for opportunity, hungry to prove that environment does not decide destiny. But university would introduce him to competition unlike anything he had faced before, and this time, hard work alone would not be enough. University was not the fresh start he imagined. It was intimidating. Students around him spoke confidently about business connections, family companies, and internships secured through relatives. He had none of that. His accent reflected his neighborhood. His clothes were simple. His bank account was nearly empty after tuition payments. For the first time in years, doubt returned. Maybe he did not belong here. Maybe this world was built for others. But instead of shrinking, he observed again, just like he did in elementary school. He noticed that the top students were not always the smartest. They were the most disciplined. They asked questions. They stayed after class. They built relationships with professors. So he changed his strategy. He sat in the front row. He introduced himself after lectures. He volunteered for difficult group projects that others avoided. While classmates partied on weekends, he reviewed case studies and practiced public speaking alone in his dorm room. Every uncomfortable moment became training. Every embarrassment became fuel. Slowly, professors began recognizing his consistency. One of them told him, "You remind me of someone who will build something big." That sentence stayed with him for months. Because sometimes one sentence from the right person can silence years of doubt. But encouragement is powerful until life tests whether you truly deserve it. In his second year, his mother's condition worsened. Hospital visits became routine. Balancing studies, part-time work, and emotional pressure felt impossible. There were nights he studied in hospital waiting rooms, textbooks opened beside vending machines. Exhaustion became normal. He considered dropping out more than once. What was the point of success if he could not even protect his family from pain? But during one quiet hospital night, his mother held his hand and said, "Do not stop. Finish what you started." Her voice was weak, but her belief was strong. That moment changed everything. He realized success was no longer just about escaping poverty. It was about honoring sacrifice. From that day forward, he stopped complaining about how hard life was. He accepted it as the price of transformation. Discipline became non-negotiable. Sleep was reduced. Focus sharpened. He began networking aggressively, attending business events across Toronto, even if it meant taking late buses home in freezing temperatures. He shook hands with strangers and introduced himself with confidence he did not always feel. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite it. And soon, one of those handshakes would open a door he had been praying for. During a networking event in downtown Toronto, he met a mid-level executive from a growing tech company. The conversation lasted only 5 minutes, but he prepared for it his entire life. He spoke clearly. He listened carefully. He followed up the next day with a thoughtful email. Weeks later, he received an internship offer. It was unpaid. Many would have rejected it. He accepted immediately. Every morning he arrived earlier than required. Every evening he stayed later than expected. He did not chase attention. He chased improvement. He studied how leaders made decisions. He analyzed how teams communicated. He volunteered for tasks outside his role. Slowly, supervisors began trusting him with larger responsibilities. Mistakes happened, and he owned every single one. That accountability separated him from others. By the end of the internship, he was no longer the poor kid from nowhere. He was the intern who delivered results. And results speak louder than background. But climbing inside someone else's company was only step one. Deep inside, he still remembered the boardroom he once cleaned, and he wanted more than a seat at the table. After graduation, he was offered a junior management position. The salary was modest, but to him it felt enormous compared to his childhood. For the first time, he could help pay medical bills without fear. For the first time, he bought groceries without calculating every dollar. But comfort is dangerous. It whispers, "This is enough." And for a moment he almost listened. Yet every time he entered the office, he studied the CEO. Not with envy, but with curiosity. What decisions shaped this company? What risks were taken? What sacrifices were hidden behind the polished image? He began waking up at 5 a.m., not because he had to, but because growth demanded it. He read books on leadership, finance, psychology. He invested small amounts of money carefully. He saved aggressively. While colleagues upgraded cars, he upgraded skills. While others chased status, he chased knowledge. Years passed. Promotions followed. But he understood something most people ignore. Climbing a ladder is not the same as building your own. And eventually, the desire to create something independent became impossible to silence. At 28, he made the most frightening decision of his life. He resigned. Stable income disappeared overnight. Friends questioned him. Colleagues warned him. Some quietly assumed he was overestimating himself. Maybe he was. But he remembered something powerful. Poverty had already shown him the worst-case scenario. He had survived that. Starting a company from a small rented workspace did not scare him the way hunger once did. He invested his savings carefully and launched a small consulting firm focused on helping local Canadian businesses improve operational efficiency. The first months were brutal. Rejections came quickly. Emails went unanswered. Doubt returned louder than ever, but discipline remained. He refined his pitch. He studied market gaps. He offered free strategy sessions to build trust. Slowly, one client turned into two. Two turned into 5. The revenue was unstable, but the momentum was real. Every late night reminded him of cleaning offices as a teenager, except now the dream was his. And still, entrepreneurship would soon test him in ways employment never could. Just as momentum began building, the economy slowed. Clients reduced budgets, contracts were delayed, cash flow tightened. For the first time since launching, fear felt physical. Employees now depended on him. Their families depended on him. Leadership was no longer motivational quotes and sunrise routines. It was responsibility under pressure. He could have downsized quickly and protected himself. Instead, he chose transparency. He gathered his small team and explained the situation honestly. Together, they cut unnecessary expenses. Together, they innovated new service packages tailored for struggling businesses. Instead of retreating, they adapted. That period forged him into a true leader, not because profits increased, but because integrity did. Trust inside the company strengthened. Clients respected the honesty. Slowly, stability returned. Revenue improved. The business survived. And survival in business, just like survival in childhood, builds an unbreakable mindset. But surviving storms is different from dominating industries, and he was no longer building just to survive. By 32, the company was no longer fragile. It was growing. What started in a small rented workspace had expanded into a respected consulting firm, serving clients across Ontario and eventually across Canada. But growth brought new challenges. Competition increased. Expectations rose. Investors began showing interest. For the first time, he was no longer just fighting for survival. He was managing scale. Systems had to be built. Leaders had to be trained. Vision had to be clearer than ever. He spent hours refining company culture, making sure no employee ever felt invisible the way he once did as a child. He created mentorship programs inside his organization, offering opportunities to young people from underprivileged communities. Because success meant nothing if it only elevated him. During board meetings, he sometimes paused and remembered the 16-year-old version of himself cleaning similar rooms. The contrast was overwhelming, yet he never allowed pride to replace discipline. Every achievement became a responsibility to improve further. And as revenue crossed milestones he once thought impossible, a new opportunity emerged. Acquisition talks that could either multiply everything or destroy what he built. A larger corporation approached him with a partnership proposal. The offer was significant. Expansion into international markets, increased capital, shared infrastructure. But partnerships are not just about numbers. They are about trust and alignment. For weeks, he analyzed contracts line by line. He sought advice from mentors. He revisited his original mission to build something meaningful, not just profitable. There were clauses that could limit autonomy. There were benefits that could accelerate impact. The decision weighed heavily. If he said yes too quickly, he could lose control. If he said no out of fear, he could limit growth. One evening, standing alone in his office overlooking downtown Toronto, he asked himself the same question he once asked as a child: will I stay small forever? The answer was still no. But this time, the risk was bigger than survival. It was about legacy. After careful negotiation, he structured a deal that protected his vision while enabling expansion. It was not luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity. And with that signature, his company entered a new chapter, one that would redefine his role completely. Expansion was intense. New offices opened, teams doubled, travel became constant. He found himself speaking at business conferences across Canada, sharing strategies on operational growth and leadership discipline. Audiences saw confidence, they saw results. What they did not see were the early mornings and the quiet sacrifices still continuing. Success did not eliminate pressure, it amplified it. Now he carried not just his own dreams, but the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. Yet every speech he delivered included a simple message: background does not define ceiling. He openly shared his childhood story, not for sympathy, but for perspective. Young entrepreneurs approached him after events, saying his journey gave them hope. In those moments, he understood something deeper than profit: influence. He was no longer just building a company, he was building belief in others. And belief, when multiplied across communities, creates transformation far beyond balance sheets. But the ultimate test of leadership was still ahead, a moment that would force him to choose between comfort and courage once again. An unexpected market disruption hit the industry. Technology shifted rapidly. Competitors adapted faster. For the first time in years, growth plateaued. Analysts questioned whether his company could sustain its pace. Media speculation began. This was not the poverty of his childhood, but it was uncertainty of a different kind. And uncertainty can quietly erode confidence if left unchecked. Instead of defending ego, he called emergency strategy sessions. He invited younger team members to present ideas, understanding that innovation often comes from fresh perspectives. He invested heavily in digital transformation, even when it reduced short-term profits. Critics called it risky. He called it necessary. Leadership is not about protecting today, it is about preparing for tomorrow. The decision demanded courage and patience. Months passed without clear results. Doubt whispered again. But he had faced doubt before. He stayed disciplined. He trusted the process. And gradually the company began outperforming competitors who had chosen comfort over adaptation. The crisis became another foundation stone. And now something extraordinary was about to happen, recognition that would bring his journey full circle. At 37, he was officially appointed CEO after restructuring elevated the company into a major national player. The announcement was published across Canadian business media. Interviews followed. Headlines celebrated his leadership. But the moment that mattered most was private. He returned to his old neighborhood one evening. The apartment building still stood, worn but familiar. Snow lightly covered the sidewalk, just as it had decades earlier. He sat in his car and looked up at the window of the small unit where an 8-year-old boy once made a promise. The contrast was overwhelming. He was no longer surviving winter. He was commanding boardrooms. Yet inside, he remained that same boy who refused to quit. Success had changed his circumstances, but discipline had shaped his identity. And as he stepped out of the car and walked past the building one last time, he understood something powerful. This was never about money. It was about proving that belief, when combined with relentless action, rewrites destiny. But the story does not end with becoming CEO, because true success is measured by what you build for others. As CEO, he redefined leadership inside the organization. He implemented scholarship programs for low-income Canadian students pursuing business education. He launched internship pipelines specifically targeting youth from underserved neighborhoods. He ensured hiring processes valued potential as much as experience, because he remembered what it felt like to be underestimated. In executive meetings, he often reminded his team that profit without purpose is empty. The company's culture shifted from performance-only metrics to balanced impact. Employees felt seen. Communities felt supported. Media recognition grew, but what mattered more were letters from young students saying, "Your story makes me believe I can do it too." Those words carried more weight than any award. And yet, even at the top, he never abandoned personal discipline. He still woke up early. He still read daily. he still reviewed strategy personally, because success is not a destination you arrive at, it is a standard you maintain. And maintaining greatness requires the same hunger that created it. One winter morning, he was invited to speak at a high school not far from where he once studied. Walking through those halls brought back memories of worn shoes and silent lunches. Students filled the auditorium, many facing struggles similar to his past. He did not present slides filled with complex data. Instead, he told them the truth. He described hunger, doubt, fear, and discipline. He explained that motivation fades, but systems sustain progress. He emphasized that excuses are easy but expensive. As he spoke, he noticed a young boy in the front row, listening intensely, eyes reflecting the same quiet determination he once carried. After the event, that boy approached him and said, "I want to be like you." He smiled and replied, "Be better," because the goal was never to create followers. It was to create leaders. And in that exchange, he saw the true multiplication of belief, the passing of possibility from one generation to the next. Late one evening, alone in his office, he reflected on the journey. The silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of poverty, it was the silence of achievement. The city lights outside his window shimmered across the Toronto skyline. He remembered the bus stop, the hospital waiting room, the janitor uniform. Every stage had shaped him. None of it was wasted. Pain had built resilience. Rejection had built strategy. Responsibility had built leadership. He realized that success was not a straight line. It was a series of decisions made under pressure. And the common thread in every stage was simple. He never stopped. Not when it was uncomfortable, not when it was unfair, not when it was slow. Consistency had beaten circumstance. And if consistency could transform his life, it could transform anyone willing to endure the process. If you are watching this right now from a small room, from a place that feels limiting, understand this. Your current environment is not your final destination. The boy in the freezing apartment did not have advantages. He had discipline. He had belief. He had the courage to act when acting was uncomfortable. Canada is a country of opportunity, but opportunity rewards preparation. No one will hand you transformation. You must build it daily. Wake up earlier, study longer, accept responsibility faster, learn from failure quicker. Surround yourself with growth. Protect your focus. The journey from struggle to CEO was not built in one dramatic moment. It was built in thousands of invisible decisions, and those decisions are available to you starting today. But knowing this is not enough. The question is whether you will apply it. This story is not about one man. It is about a principle. Struggle is not a verdict, it is training. Poverty is not permanent unless you surrender. Doubt is not destiny unless you accept it. The freezing apartment was not the end, it was the beginning. The hospital nights were not weakness, they were preparation. The rejections were not failures, they were refinement. From an 8-year-old boy staring at snow through cracked glass to a CEO overlooking the Toronto skyline, the distance was measured in discipline. And now the question becomes personal. Years from today, when you look back at this moment, will you say this was the day you decided to change everything? Or will it be just another video you watched and forgot? The next chapter of your story is unwritten. And just like that boy once did, you have the power to make a promise tonight that your future self will thank you for.